Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this week's edition of the Coworking Values Podcast, the sweetest smelling podcast about co-working in the whole of Europe and all the way from Subotica.
Well, you keep, hatching it away every episode.
I originally thought that it was the town in Age of Ultron where that gets lifted out the ground, but that's the only reason I started hanging out with you.
Yeah, well, we are all Marvel fans, so you're forgiven.
So today we have Sir Neil Usher, who's I don't know, like the most vibrant workspace consultant in London. In London, is that fair?
First of all, I'm not knighted, and probably a long, long way from being knighted. I'm probably right at the back of the queue, actually. But yeah, sort of London and anywhere that it takes me, really. I've worked most parts of the world, but I'm based in London, and obviously right now travel is pretty restricted. So just sitting here in West London.
So we're what we're going to do now. We're going to need to go and have a word from Cobot, who is our favourite co-working space software, and see what the heck they have to say about supporting this podcast.
This episode is brought to you by Cobot, a leading management software for co-working spaces, office hubs, and flexible workspaces around the world. One of the best things about Cobot is that it is produced by people who manage a co-working space and know the ins and outs of the main problems and issues bugging co-working managers. So if you want more time for your coworkers and community, check out Cobot at cobot.me and take your co-working management to the next level. And that was a word from our sponsor. Okay, so we're back and talking to Neil. So Neil, how is consulting business now that you're, did you take it remote, or is it just based in London right now?
Sort of workplace consulting, if there is such a definable thing, is sort of part of that is conducted on site, and part of it is done remotely anyway. So right now, most of it, if not all of it, is being done remotely. When people aren't in their actual workspaces, in the main, most of the work that's being done is scenario planning and sort of more what if. Sort of looking at various options for returning to the workplace, or returning to less workplace, or moving to more flexible space. So most of it is desktop planning anyway at the moment.
And sorry, Bernie, did the business boom in this situation, or is it the vice versa?
From my own point of view, in terms of what I've witnessed and conversations I've had, I think for the first few months during the early lockdown, I think everything sort of almost froze, because virtually, nobody had seen something like this before. We had no timeline. We had no idea of how this was going to play out at all. And of course, it wasn't a gradual migration to a remote working sort of setup. It was all done, overnight virtually. So I think for the first few months, it was a little bit sort of terror almost of what's going to happen. What do we do? Where do we go? How do we even think about planning for this? What started to happen, I think, the boost of a potential vaccine was good news for many, and so I think people have started to realise that a lot of those scenarios that they've been working through may well become plans in the not too distant future. But there's still a huge amount of uncertainty over all of this, and so still a lot of this work is being done from a more theoretical point of view. But I think we've noticed since that sort of little bit of the late summer, when people did start to migrate back into the urban centres, I think we've seen just as sort of the industry gather itself a little bit and start to really think about the scenarios that may actually play out in the end.
So Neil, the last book you had was the Elemental Workspace, and we podcasted around that. And then I got to ask, because I think I'm really funny, did you plan to write a book about elemental change before, during, or after COVID?
Definitely a long way before. The publication process is quite drawn out. I found that with the first book. I just expected that you sort of submitted a draft and someone had a little look through it and made a few changes, and then you basically sort of some computers would do some stuff, and then you press print and off you go. But actually, book writing and publication is an incredibly manual process until the very last stages of it all. The sort of the editing process is all about experienced writers and editors working through your manuscript. So it takes about 9 months end to end, or at least it's taken me 9 months end to end from submission of a completed draft to the book coming out. There was an extra couple of months in here for COVID, because I actually finished the copy edit process just as the lockdown happened. And then they said, look, no rush getting your comments back, because the book's not going to come out till much later in the year now. And I'd started, this probably taken me 2 years really to sort of end to end on this one, because unlike the first book where I sat in monastic silence in my home office for about 6 weeks and literally just destroyed my keyboard writing it all off the top of my head, this one's taken a lot more sort of painstaking approach, bits and pieces of research and reading here and there, and just writing it sort of in whatever time I had available, weekends, some evenings. It's really been much more of a part-time effort, this one.
I mean, I'm only a few pages in, but I can feel that part-timeness coming through already. But it's so does this, because I'm still getting through it, because you are one of the few people in the world whose books I actually read, because I just can't read. I listen to books all the time. So I'm still wading through my copy. But did all this happen and you go, my goodness, isn't it so cool? I've written a book about change. Or, I mean, did the book, like, did the world pandemic support your book, or did you have to go back and rethink large chunks of it?
I probably rethought just 2 or 3 little bits of it, really. It was actually quite an interesting test, So what I've created here, can it cope with a fairly sort of seismic event like a pandemic that we hadn't expected to arrive? And is the sort of structure and the framework and the models and things I put into it, is it sort of robust enough to be able to deal with all of this? And I guess I was sort of quite comfortable with the fact that it could cope with it. I put a few references in, but I didn't want it to become a sort of COVID era book either. So I didn't want to start weaving COVID right through it. So I think I've probably specifically referenced it twice. One of those bits, actually, probably the most interesting bit that I found was I'd sort of, when I used to go for walks around here, I started noticing that, these sort of desire paths people talk about, the sort of shortcuts that people take to get from one place to another, like the wild animals in the savannah and things. They wear paths in the undergrowth in terms of the shortest possible paths. Was that actually sort of what had started to happen in my local area with the fields and things around the back, was that the paths were actually getting more distant. So they were actually the long ways round. So they weren't people taking shortcuts. They were making sure they could stay 2 meters apart and were avoiding each other. So the short chapter I'd written about desire paths and people taking shortcuts and needing to sort of to almost, make allowances for those shortcuts to happen and to follow them, was sort of challenged by COVID, really, because suddenly they were becoming long cuts rather than shortcuts. So those sorts of references I built into the book as sort of in terms of the COVID experience, but I didn't really change much else.
And what so one thing I'm dying to get to is I can't remember whether it's in the book or was in the Herman Miller talk, where you said about our attitude to is it physical safety does not go far enough, or psychological safety, does not go far enough. And you give this example between like the Me Too movement and the personal protection thing. And can you elaborate on that a bit? Because that really caught my ear.
Yeah, psychological safety is a sort of, it's quite a vogue term. I wrote a little bit about it yesterday and published it in terms of the fact that it's sort of a vital term and a vogue term, and there's not a lot of expressions that are out there that tick both of those boxes. They're usually either important or they're in fashion, but rarely, very rarely both. So there's a lot of talk about trust during COVID, because there's those sort of visual signals that we get that we're trusted, and we trust in a work environment when we're not in each other's physical presence are slightly challenged. So in thinking about trust, and there's a lot of people writing about trust at the moment, I'd started including sort of work on psychological safety in the book, because I've been fascinated by it for quite some time. And what we mean by it, if you haven't come across it before, is that it's a space for safe conflict. People can actually challenge one another. They can speak their minds. They can freely express, criticize, whatever sort of they need to do, but they can do it without fear of judgment or reproach. It's sort of, we all trust one another at a group level as a team, and we can all speak freely. So I think, in most working environments I've been in, if not all of them, it's been a sort of vital ingredient, and an aim that we should all pursue. But I kept being sort of concerned, really, that, and all the research I did suggested that physical safety was sort of treated as something else, someone else's responsibility. And I give the three examples. One is the Me Too movement, which we're sort of long overdue calling out of poor behaviour and physically unsafe behaviour in the workplace. The rise, if you like, in the term personal protective equipment, which used to be something that was either only known to healthcare or facilities management professionals, but now everybody knows what PPE is. And the third example being, and I'd experienced this a few times in my career, where you're working in fairly isolated communities where there's one major employer, and if you're actually trying to get something done in that employer's business or in their premises, it can potentially have quite a big impact on just about everybody in that local community. And there were a couple of times where I was, the carrier of the corporate message and the corporate intent in a fairly remote community, feeling slightly uncomfortable about it from a physical point of view. So the idea was to say, well, is psychological safety enough? The other thing about psychological safety is we always have to explain what it means, because nobody instinctively knows what it means. So it's actually quite a clumsy term. It's not particularly helpful to us if we have to keep explaining it. So I thought, well, it's got to include sort of, the rational side of safety. It's got to include the emotional side of safety. So really, it should include the physical. And because both the books were called Elemental Something, it just seemed to make sense that we call it elemental safety. It feels like something that's fundamental to being in a workplace, that you have to have it. Why would you not have any of these three components of safety? So hence I've sort of given it an expression that I hope will involve a lot less explanation, because it's now comprehensive rather than a subset of something.
So the bit that got my attention, because I'm just, not I, but we're all in the co-working assembly very interested in and active in inclusion, equality, and accessibility, and things like that, and how people can communicate fluidly that way around. But also, I wondered that, like, there's a bit of me that thinks that the kind of top down, you must come to work because that's what we do, world has been toppled. And now everyone's discovered that you don't actually need to be, in an office, and that all that conversation. And how do you think that's affected, like, the power structure in most, typical organisations? If you see what I mean.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk, I think, sort of the last few months about, has the balance of power shifted in favour of the employee? I mean, I think it's a bit unfortunate that we talk about a power balance, really, of sort of them and us. I'd far sooner see a world of work that sort of just meant that everybody shared common interests and was in it together, really, rather than that kind of employee versus employer situation. But that said, I think that in these situations, like we've had in previous recessions, where we think something has shifted, when those forces start to retreat, do we go back to the way things used to be? Do the old patterns emerge? There was an article in City AM this morning that I think said that 2/3 of employers plan to scrap working from home as soon as the sort of vaccines distributed and COVID is a thing of the past. There is every possibility that some of the hopes that a lot of people had for a new way of working and new work relationships and this balance of power may well be literally just sort of steamrolled by a return to a sort of a way of being and a way of working that we knew in the past. And I guess a lot of us don't really know how this is going to pan out. So I'm all in favour of sort of less talk of them and us, less talk of power and balances of power, and more talk of, from a sort of D&I point of view, of sort of everybody sharing a common interest and a common goal, really, which is to create a better world of work. And I think if we can, somehow dismantle some of these ideas of them and us, then it's going to be beneficial to everyone.
And what could we do to dismantle those them and us ideas? Because I always feel that when I talk to even friends of mine that are like managing directors in companies, they're there's one friend of mine who needs to get everyone back in the office as soon as possible, and I've kind of almost just stopped talking to them because I know that you can work from anywhere, and they think everyone has to be where he can see them, and I know, like in some aspects of it, that is absolutely right, because there's collaborative work that has to happen that can only happen, when everyone's in the same room riffing off each other. But part of it is definitely like, I think this is what it's supposed to be. But what can we do to like educate or inspire people in a different direction?
Well, something that's in favour of a more sort of balanced and distributed way of working is that we have at least proven now that most of what we need to get done, we can get done when we're not in each other's physical presence. That doesn't mean to say that what we're getting done and the ways we're doing it is ideal, and it doesn't mean to say that that we should all just work in this distributed fashion. There are without doubt times and scenarios and challenges we face where we're much better off being in each other's physical presence, without doubt. But that doesn't necessarily mean to say that it's the panacea, but nor is fully distributed working the panacea, because all those firms who don't have any office space do have to make a conscious and a willing effort to get their people together face to face at various times of the year. I know of virtually no examples where people just never see each other face to face, never meet. I don't even know how that could even be possible, really, for creation of culture, etc. But at least
it's called Upwork.
Yeah. But at least we've got past one major hurdle in all of this, which was we do know that distributed work works. In the main, it might be that some people struggle to find space in their house or haven't got the physical location to work in. That's accepted. We do know that a lot is lost in online interaction and sort of video calls and those sorts of things, that they're not quite the same. But there are significant advantages of doing that as well, in terms of reach, in terms of immediacy, in terms of talent sourcing, just learning the ways to work asynchronously rather than synchronously. All these things over the last 9 months or so have become very apparent to us. So there has been a shift. So when organizations are saying, right, everyone back in the office, I need to see you, everyone that's coming back knows that there is a different way of working that works. And 9 months ago, for most people, that was just a hunch or just a belief. If we all just gave it a go, it might actually pan out. Can we have an experiment where we all work in a distributed fashion? No, I need to see you here. We're not going to do that. Now that we've actually been through that, we do know that it works. So I think what we're likely to see after, if there's a rapid rollout of a vaccine, we'll see quite a spike in return to office practices. But I think the likelihood that sort of presence and that sort of requirement to be in that space will decline thereafter is quite high, because we know that the alternative works. So once we've been back, we've seen everybody, we've spent time in each other's company, we've told our stories about being in lockdown and shared all the funny anecdotes and all the rest of it, we'll think, right, okay, so next week, what am I going to do next week? Well, do I really need to be in 5 days next week? Well, probably not, actually, because I've got this piece of work, I've got that piece of work, and I can do that on a video call. That piece of work, I'm working with people outside of the UK, so I don't need to, physically be in the office to talk to someone on a video call. And we'll start planning in that way. So I think we'll see this, peak return to office space. But I think, we've turned a corner, really, that there's no going back now. Now that we've proven that distributed work works, in the main, we're not going to undo that knowledge and that experience.
Do you feel like, for someone that's been around this for years, do you feel like that's a huge hurdle? Is it like, the big things happened, the movements won, or?
Yeah, I think it's massive. And I think I was trying to sort of look at it from the history of sort of mankind, really, in terms of when, what sort of phases of evolution have we been through? And this is probably the first time we've faced a situation in our labour where we can effectively and successfully work whilst not in immediate physical presence of those people we're working with. we think about all the other activities that we've ever been involved in, whether it's hunter-gathering or agriculture or, or sort of artisan craftsmanship or through the Industrial Revolution. They all relied on physical presence, at least for some of the time. Even though sort of artisan craftsmen used to take their work home with them and then bring it back, they would always spend time in the master craftsman's workplace learning the trade and exchanging ideas. And it was vital. So even when we've had remote and distributed work, we've always erred on the side of physical presence to get things done and to learn and to transfer knowledge. So this might just be one of those major phases in our evolution where the technology that's available to us and the means that are available to us have actually made it possible. We can actually work in a distributed fashion effectively for the first time in our history.
There's a nice little segue there, because the last time we podcasted, I was having a little whine about people talking about never-endingly talking about the future of the work and the future of the office. And can you say a little bit about that? When you at that time, and maybe you've changed your opinion, is like about being present, because that I've been quoting you on that for a long time now. But
what have you been quoting me?
Because you said I just want to like rip my eyelids off and stick them in my ears when people go about the future of work, and in 2018 that's gone, hasn't it? But like the 2028, 63% of women and men with fingernails will work in offices, and the others will work from the sky. And like, and you said you said it's about, we should think about being present instead of like living in 2040. That's not your exact words, but that's kind of
much more. We've still got issues to solve in the present before we start, navel gazing about the future. And I maintain that the office hasn't really changed much in the whole time I've been working on it, and I've been working in an office since I hate to admit it, but since around about 1985, I think. Of one sort or another, I've essentially been office based. Whether that's home office or someone else's office primarily, but. I'm pretty adamant that if I picked up my kit and there was a Wi-Fi connection in the first ever office I worked in, just about everything else around me would be fairly familiar. Maybe not the pile of transit envelopes and the in tray and the filing cabinets, but essentially, it's a physical space with a desk and chairs and meeting spaces, things. I mean, it's not massively different from what we encountered decades ago. So, navel gazing about the future of the office is kind of fun sometimes, just doing a little bit of imagining, but it's not particularly helpful when we've got issues we have to resolve today. If you look at a lot of the survey data that's taken place over this sort of lockdown period, the results are coming out that people feel they can work at home far more effectively than they can in their offices. There's still a lot to be done in relation to the workplaces that we ask people to go to. They're still far from solving everyone's problems and providing everything they need to be productive, individually and as teams.
So how far, as a workspace professional, Mr. Usher, how far ahead do you think we should be thinking?
I think the issue for our industry is that it's still very linear. Everything we do is, right, okay, let's get the brief. Let's talk to everybody, find out what everybody wants. Let's develop the strategy. That then becomes a design project. So now we understand what the brief is. Let's design something that hopefully meets the brief. That doesn't always happen, but hopefully meets the brief. And then let's procure it, build it. That takes quite a bit of time and a lot of money. And then let's furnish it, move people in. We'll come back in about 3 months' time, check everyone's okay, do a little survey again, which hopefully will link through to the original strategy, and then the piece of work is finished. And that can take anything from sort of 6 months to 3 years, depending on the scale and the location and a number of other factors. And we then expect that is going to last us for the next 5 to 10 years before we do it all again. But actually, I think in terms of future focusing and where this is all going, we need to be much more able to make small changes and to look at this as a life cycle, not as these sort of great huge events conducted in a very linear fashion that just sort of puncture every sort of decade or so in the calendar. Because what happens is the brief really the brief can only look, a few months in advance really to be successful. Who knows what's going to happen to an organization, internal, and now we're very aware of external pressures on an organization as well. The change that organization is going to be subjected to from inside and from outside the organization, whether it's pandemics or the markets or supplies of raw materials or whatever it is, cannot be forecast. And so consequently, a workplace needs to be responsive. I think the one winning idea out of the pandemic is flexibility. A workplace has to be flexible enough to cope with whatever is thrown at it internally or externally, because a lot is going to change. It's going to be unpredictable, and we really don't know what we don't know. We don't know what's coming, and we don't know what those influences will be. So a workplace has to be flexible, and it has to be able to cope with that. And we have to have the mechanisms and the processes in place to be able to make those adjustments and changes. So the future is going to be much more emergent than it is this sort of traditional way that the workplace industry works with huge projects. And if we think, it's like the software industry, just before the Agile Manifesto, all those huge software projects that repeatedly failed because they were all conducted on a huge scale in a very linear fashion. And by the time they were delivered, they didn't meet the requirements anymore because the world had moved on. And that's what the workplace has been doing for the last 20, 30 years. So we have to be much more agile, not just in terms of the workplace layouts. That's not what I'm talking about here when I use the word agile. I just mean agile in relation to expecting change to happen, but not necessarily knowing what that change is and being ready to deal with it and being ready to meet it. So I'd rather see less sort of, great sort of future navel gazing and trying to envision what the workplace of the future will look like, and a much greater preparedness to sort out today's problems and be prepared, not plan, but be prepared to meet all of the change that is about to come.
That's great. I'm going to put a link in the show notes to the Agile Manifesto so you can read Ken and Jeff's work, because there's a lot of people running around using the word agile in a very incorrect way. So if I encourage you folks to go and we're going to put a link in the show notes to hunt down Neil on LinkedIn and also his blog where he takes people out on a regular basis. And it really is like some of the best writing I've heard around the workspace for, I know, years and years and years. I can't remember when we first met, but it was before you managed to write a book. And also there's, where's the best place to find it? Where do you want us to buy the book? From your website or on
it's whatever website you choose that you feel happy with buying books from, I would say, whatever works for you. But it's published by Lid, who are a sort of got a good reach as a business book publisher, so it should be available in most places that you might look.
So the Elemental Workplace is from, is it 2017?
It's published in 2018, sort of around about February, I think, 2018. This one comes out on Friday officially, but is up for pre-order. And as you were chatting to me before we went on air, I've been doing a fair amount of sort of letting people know that it's coming and introducing a few of the ideas from it.
Brilliant. And what, shout out the name of your blog so people know where to go, and we'll put it in the show notes.
Well, actually, what happened was I shut Work Essence down. So I had this blog, Work Essence, running for about 10 years. And what I realised was, after a little while, we've sort of shifted our focus really. So all of I would publish the blogs and I'd put them on Twitter and LinkedIn and all the sort of usual places, and it wasn't really generating a lot of traffic. So I tried posting through LinkedIn, about same sort of traffic. And then I switched to Medium. So I've got a few posts on Medium, and I'm intending to use the sort of the Work Essence site on Medium to put long form blogs on. And then I found actually I was having quite a lot of fun with the sort of 220 word posts on LinkedIn. So if you follow me on LinkedIn, then you'll get access to sort of wherever I happen to be posting stuff. And I've just had some serious lessons in how to write blog posts and how to title them and things. And I realized that for 10 years I've been doing it all wrong, and really just not, no wonder I wasn't getting the sort of traffic I wanted, was because I was just making some sort of fairly sort of fundamental errors really with the way it was all set up. So my intent in the future is to right those wrongs, and but for the time being, Medium will be the main place I'll do the long form posting.
the only post I'm interested in really is the ones that reference like the Clash and stuff like that. But then it was years ago, was when you were at the I can't remember. It would be bad karma to say what the event was, but it was about well-being in the workplace. And you wrote this scathing live blog about everyone running to the back of the room to eat chocolate biscuits when they were returning to find out about healthy living.
Yeah, there's those contradictions are everywhere. I remember once at a workplace conference having a presentation from a company that made pies, and they were talking about all their well-being initiatives, which I thought were fantastic. But there was an obvious question, as I'm sure you can work out, rattling around in my head, and I thought, well, no one else is going to ask this, so I guess I'm going to have to ask it. How do you sort of reconcile these things? And I was sort of fairly surprised to find that there wasn't a sort of clear answer on that. But just most things we do in workplace will have an effect on other things. Some of those effects we will be we'll be expecting, and a number of them we won't. So we always have to keep our eyes and ears open.
Ace, thank you very much for your time today, Neil. Any words of wisdom before we shoot off, Shelko?
No, I'm just catching notes and listening and thinking about the whole subject. We've been talking about remote work for a couple of episodes now, but I think Neil had, given depth to the topic that so far we hadn't had.
I think you needed to hear that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'm delighted to be invited. It's fab to talk to you both.
Cheers. Ladies and gentlemen, if you go to coworkingassembly.eu and count to, I think it's like 8 seconds nowadays, a little box will pop up and you'll be able to put your email address in there, and we will email you news, all the content we have from people around the European co-working scene every week, and of course this podcast. And when you hit reply, that comes back to us. We're real life human beings, and it's just great for helping us find guests to this podcast and find out what's going on in the zeitgeist that is European co-working. Stay safe and take care of each other. Thanks very much.